This episode is kindly sponsored by the Consent Collective. If you haven't come across their work before, they're a training organisation led by psychologist Dr. Nina Burrows, creating expert-led, trauma-informed content on consent and the prevention of sexual harassment. I'm not just reading this ad, I've actually completed their investigations training myself to support part of my consultancy work, and I can say firsthand that it's some of the most thoughtful and practical training I've ever done. The Consent Collective is already trusted by universities across the UK to help create impactful learning programmes that take students and staff well beyond the basics. So whether it's helping students understand consent, empowering people to be bystanders, or ensuring your key teams have the right specialist skills, their work is designed to have the impact you're looking for. And just launched their new collaboration with tech solutions company Simplicity, bringing you tailored learning content, seamless workflows, and meaningful evaluation tools that offer a full and elegant solution to your efforts to educate students and staff about consent and the prevention of sexual harassment. Find out more at consentcollective.com. I'm Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is Anna Quinn, Head of Student Services at the University of Northampton. In addition to leading her large team, Anna contributes to the strategic development of the university, such as its bid for the University Mental Health Charter and work on student suicide prevention. She also talks in this episode about the work she's led since 2017 on addressing sexual misconduct and the grounding this has offered the university in addressing the new Office for Students requirements. Anna also shares her reflections on leadership development and the future direction of student services. Anna, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being my guest today. You're Head of Student Services at the University of Northampton, a post that you've held since April 2024. Can you give us an overview of your role, your team, and where you're positioned organisationally in the university?
Hi, Susanna. Lovely to be here. Yes, so my role as Head of Student Services involves oversight of a number of teams. All of them deliver specialist support to students. So it includes our counselling mental health team, Assist, which is our disability service, financial guidance, student support and advice, our safeguarding team, which is a relatively new addition this academic year, and that incorporates all of our sexual violence liaison officer support. And then I also have under my remit our multi-faith centre and the student information desk. In terms of where we're positioned, it's a department within professional services, and student services forms about half of the Directorate of Library Learning and Student Services.
And what sort of size of team do you have? How many people?
It's quite a big team, actually, compared to some other institutions. So in total, we hit about 80, and then there's a number of different contracts within that. So some of the team are term time only. The majority are with us all year round, supporting students.
You've worked in higher education since 2010, when you started as a student administration team administrator. Step us through your career path so far, and what was it and what is it about higher education that's made it your focus?
I would say that I don't think my career path has been particularly intentional when I came into HE in 2010. At that time, I was a recent graduate, so I did a bit of travelling and then straight after university, and then was looking for work, and a vacancy came up at my local university in the student admin team at the time. And I'd studied criminology and social policy, so I had a vague interest in education policy. I'd grown up with parents who were teachers, so it felt like quite a comfortable fit, I think, going to work in higher education. And I spent about a year in that role because it was fixed term. And when that came to an end, I wanted to move to London, more for the lifestyle really than career, if I'm honest, and found a role there working at King's College London in the medical education department. so in community medical education, as a project coordinator. And it was a great role. It was really varied. And it included events, managing events, organising placements in the community for first and second year medical students. And the team there was really multidisciplinary. So people from all different medical backgrounds worked within that team and had become educators in their careers. And then there's a lot of research happening as well. So there's a real public health focus, lots around health inequalities, access to healthcare, which I found really interesting. And it was slightly aligned to what I'd studied when I was a student. So I really loved that environment. And whilst there, I recognised, I think, that I wanted to work in a career that was supporting people. I was really interested in human behaviour and wanted to be in a helping profession of some capacity. But I'd also really developed a love at that point for HE. So I decided to study a master's in therapeutic counselling. So I did that in the evenings, and my employer at the time was really keen to give me a day off in the week to go and study and do the theoretical side. And then I was seeing clients in the evenings. And when I finished my master's, I had to make a decision really about whether to stay in London or whether to move out. So I made the decision to move back to Northampton, and I worked for a short period of time at the Open University. That was the point at which I stepped into a support role within HE, where previously it had been more administrative, and worked as a senior advisor for the Open University. And then really shortly after I started doing that role, a job came up at Northampton University again, and it was a student support officer role. And it was a new role that they'd created that would essentially stop students falling through gaps between services. And so I went into that role with another colleague, who I still work with now, and we got to design it really from the ground up. And it was great. It was meeting students every day that would walk in and have a problem, and you'd have to kind of work and help them through that problem, refer them on to other teams, or just be a listening ear for them. From there, I then took a step up into an academic advisor role, which had a lot of similarities, but was much more policy based and dealing with more complex queries that were linked to regulation. And following that, became the manager of that student support and advice team. And with that came a real increase in safeguarding. We saw a much higher risk caseload. I took that role in towards the end of 2019. So then the first couple of years were very much impacted by COVID, and did that role for 4 years. I reached a point, I think, where I felt like I'd exhausted what I could do in it. So I was looking for a change. So I went from there and moved to a different university. I went to Aston for an interim contract as head of student experience, because I really, at that point, felt like I wanted to be doing work that was a bit more strategic, and I wanted to see what else was out there in the sector. I think I'd been at Northampton for a little while, and I wanted to experience something different. Whilst I was in that interim position, the head of student services came up at Northampton. So I applied for it and was really thrilled to be successful and go back to Northampton and work with the colleagues that I'd worked with before, but at a more strategic level. In terms of what's made higher education my focus, it's quite hard to say. I think there's so much opportunity in it. There's so much opportunity to diversify. And I think I have always had a belief in the importance of the sector, an interest in higher education policy. It's evolving quickly. I love the support side of working with students. So it's just been a good fit for me.
You gave us an overview of your role in your team a few moments ago, and obviously that gives us a flavour of what you do. And you've just talked there about, what motivates you to be in HE and your interest in strategic work as well. And I'm interested to know a bit more about the strategic developments or large projects you've been leading or are involved with at the university, and also who you've been working with on those.
I think because it's such a big team at Northampton, there's a lot of really interesting projects and strategic developments that the department are involved in. So given the nature and the expertise of the teams that are within student services, we're quite heavily involved in our APP strategic initiative. So all of the work that is carried out that contributes towards widening participation and the progression of students in certain groups. So work around trying to increase male students to engage with mental health support, for example. There's a few projects like that we have on the go. And then I am also involved in our bid for University Mental Health Charter. So that's quite a small team with a number of domain leads from across different departments in the university. So from across estates and campus services, HR, library and learning and teaching, and from within student services. And under that work, my responsibility is for the enabling strand, which weaves through all of those domains actually and tries to bring together the work that's happening to demonstrate the impact. Prior to our university mental health charter work, I was the chair of the Suicide Safer framework for the university. So that had a focus on prevention, intervention, and postvention activity to try and reduce risks of suicidality in our student body. Also, currently, I think coming towards the end of, I'd like to say, a working group that's looking at the Equality and Human Rights Commission advice note that was published last year to ensure that we're where we need to be with the work around reasonable adjustments for students who have disclosed a disability to us or who may need reasonable adjustments for the work that they're doing to make sure that we're compliant with the Equality Act. And I think that probably the meatiest strategic work that we're doing at the moment that I'm leading on is our internal review of E6 conditions. So the OFS have released that condition around sexual harassment and misconduct and requirements around how universities should respond. And so we have a working group that has a huge amount of representation from across the university, from the academic community, estates and campus services, various teams within student services, registry, our students' union, and some key student groups to make sure that we're compliant in time. And with all of those, there's elements are being guided by external organisations, so other HEIs as well as advisory groups and UK and Amoshi. I think part of what I like about these sorts of projects is where we can work external to the sector. So working with our local suicide prevention leads in the county, for example, or working with organisations like the Consent Collective when we're looking at the sexual misconduct work, because we're dealing with quite big issues. I think using both that internal and external network is quite key to the success of those projects.
You've mentioned just there the work you are doing at the university on sexual harassment and misconduct in response to the new Office for Students condition that takes effect from August 2025. And that condition, as we know, it requires all English HE institutions registered with the OFS to have a highly comprehensive approach in responding to those situations. You've been working on creating and implementing a robust approach to that well before this new OFS condition was announced. Can you share some more about the origins of your work in that area and what your approach has been?
It's been really interesting, this work, and it's been good to see it develop in the way that it has. In the HE context, the origins of my work here probably go back to the student support officer role, so back to 2017. And it was in part really around the timing of that. So it was around when the HEFKE Catalyst Fund for Changing the Culture had been released. It was the year of the Me Too movement, but it was also really grounded in my experience of working with students who were coming forward. Prior to being a student support officer, I mentioned I'd trained as a counsellor, I'd worked in a counselling setting, and quite a number of the clients that I had in that setting would disclose having experienced sexual violence of some kind or another. And in that environment, I felt relatively competent at responding and at knowing how to hold a safe space for them, at knowing how to approach those issues with clients. I had clinical supervision. I was in an environment where there was a structure around how we support clients. within higher education at that point in 2017, it felt very different for me. I had students coming forward disclosing. It was evidently having a massive impact on their experience. And for me personally, it had quite an impact in that was in a position where I felt that I didn't know what I could do to help. And I didn't have clinical supervision. There was no clear boundaries. There wasn't a clear process at that point in time. It's still around the time of Zealot guidelines that advise universities not to handle issues that were a criminal matter. But they were coming forward and they needed support. And so, in being alongside students who were making reports, it became evident that the complaints processes that had existed weren't really fit for this purpose at all. And then with the hefty work happening across the sector, it opened up a lot of research taking place, a lot of conferences, a lot of conversations. I had a really great manager who was really supportive of me diving into this work and sent me to conferences, and opened a few doors for me, kind of guiding me of how to navigate this kind of change within the sector, which was really useful. So I started to build a support package for students and was really lucky at that point, where I was quite junior in my career, to work quite closely with the academic registrar then on policy and with the director of HR on different policies that we needed to look at. And we were also able to secure funding through that work for SVLOs. And as the timeline happened, when we secured the funding for those SVLOs, they were all within my team and I'd become the manager of that team. So it's over quite a long period of time. And so that enabled me to add in clinical supervision for them, to work around caseload management. So falling back actually on a lot of my experience of counselling and the structures around counsellors in their work. And having those roles then helped to inform our process. It helped us to become more trauma informed in the way that we responded to cases that were coming forward. And then there were some kind of practical elements that had to be done alongside, which were things like building our internal reporting routes, developing campaigns. And so because that work had happened from 2017 onwards and it had been evolving, both through the need to and through feedback from students and through the cases that were coming forward and through the insights of those staff that were involved in the work. When the OFS decision was made last year, I felt relatively prepared, and obviously been keeping quite a close eye on developments anyway. So in terms of the approach, I think I've been probably quite persistent in pursuing positive developments in this area, but also it's become apparent through the work that collaboration across the university is really, really key. In listening to what your students need has been a key part of the approach, and a big part for me, which I have to remind myself of quite often, is that we're managing what is an incredibly uncomfortable topic for a lot of people. This isn't the everyday for most people who work in universities. So our academic colleagues and people working in different services find this subject area quite terrifying, as do I sometimes. So I think my approach has been to try and maintain that awareness that what we're dealing with here is really difficult. And so having patience for that and allowing space for that has also been quite a big part of the work for me, I think.
You talked a few moments ago, you referenced the Consent Collective, and I know you've worked closely with them. They're an organisation that supports workplaces and higher education institutions in efforts to prevent harassment, respond to reports, investigate cases, and provide individuals with support. What have you seen to be the benefits of being involved with specialist external organisations alongside the wider networks?
I think the benefits of using External organisations are huge, actually, and particularly if you can get the funding to do it. I know it's not that easy at this point in time, but the Consent Collective in particular, we brought on board quite a while ago, I think potentially 2019, maybe 2020. And that was in part because we were trying to build campaigns for students, and it's really, really hard to get the messaging right on these sorts of campaigns. And the way forward is not always particularly clear. And so working with the Consent Collective in particular has been incredibly helpful, because I think I would be foolish to think that I can be an expert in everything. And so it's really, I found it invaluable to bring together other people's expertise when I need it. As an example, we've had a number of roundtables recently around the E6 condition to talk about different elements that different organisations are finding challenging, and they've been key for me to start unpicking some of the issues, partnerships being one, that I didn't know where to start with. And quite recently, we had a really good session actually with Consent Collective and Hill Dickinson, who are a law firm, looking at best practice around disciplinary panels, because the reasoning for that was something that I've been grappling with for a long time, which was how you pair the legal perspective with the psychological perspective, and how we make our processes psychologically safe as we possibly can for students. So yeah, those external networks and wider sector networks, I think, have been really helpful, and not just in the problem solving of those process and strategic issues, but also just general moral support. I think at the moment, or shared angst for certain things, is just, it's just really helpful to me, particularly in current financial landscape, where we are being asked to do quite a lot with not a lot of investment quite often. Talking to other people and sharing the pain and picking up some ideas along the way is great, I think.
It is, as you say, it is a challenging area to deal with. And you talked before about, it being a difficult topic for many colleagues in universities. I mean, experiences or allegations of sexual harassment or misconduct can be life-changing for the people concerned. Managing the allegations and investigations is also really challenging for institutions, especially with cases being assessed on the balance of probability, which is obviously different to the process that happens in a criminal court setting. What are your views on how higher education institutions can best navigate cases?
This is something that I toy with quite a lot, I think, how we can do this in the best possible way, and what our role is as higher education institutions. And obviously, a significant amount of that is dictated to us, and that's absolutely fine. I think on a basic level, my view is that if we get our processes robust, fair, transparent, and trauma informed, that's a big tick. And I think I've held the belief for a long time that if we can get our students through our processes in a way that is kind and well supported, then that in itself can contribute to healing from these experiences if we get it right. And obviously that's a big if, because it is an incredibly difficult area to work in. The flip side of that is, I think what I've come to learn is that we need to be really aware of our own limitations as higher education institutions, and with that awareness, really manage our students' expectations about the powers that we have to intervene, particularly when we're thinking about outcomes, and be quite clear that we can't give the same outcomes that the criminal justice system can, but instead work really closely with our local police, with our sexual assault referral centres, with local domestic abuse services, to ensure that students who are coming forward have all of the options, that they're not pinning everything on the university necessarily, but they have all of the options available to them about the route that they might want to go down. And I think, despite not using legal terminology in our processes and not replicating criminal justice system, I think there is an increasing pressure to do that. And so I find that I have to remind myself of the primary function of higher education institutions when I'm doing this work, which is to educate, it's to inform people, it's to be a catalyst for positive social change. And so that should remain at the heart of what we do in this area as much as possible. But obviously, that's a really fine balance between that and ensuring a safe environment for our students and for our staff to work. So I think my views on how we best navigate it are ever changing. But currently, at this point in time, I think that's where they sit.
You've developed your career path to the role you have now, and no doubt that's been informed by on the job experiences and opportunities that have arisen along the way. But I know from reading up about you, you've also engaged with development and training outside the institutions in which you've worked. What was your motivation for pursuing those external opportunities, and how did you identify what was right for you?
I'm really interested in higher education policy. I love it. I'm a bit of a geek about it, to be honest. And so that's always an easy motivator, isn't it? I love to learn about higher education. In part, motivation is career development. In part, at times, it's been wanting a promotion. But it's also a bit of a given to me that working in HE, I will always be learning something. I will always be doing something alongside the day job that is adding to what I do and enhancing it. So I suppose that's the motivation. Identifying which ones were right for me. I think the main ones that I've done recently that I would speak to are we have a really good internal leadership course at University of Northampton. So I did that a few years ago, and that probably was the trigger for me looking at more leadership training. So I attended the Minerva Emerging Leaders course, which is excellent. I'd really recommend that to anyone if you can get on it. And also I completed the postgraduate certificate in higher education leadership management and administration. I think because I'd done some leadership training, I wanted something that carried credits, I suppose. And yeah, so identifying those, why I chose those, I think it was a balance of the policy side, and they all had an element of reflective practice, which I find really useful in my work day to day. And they all included an element of mentoring and coaching, and they had voices from different higher education institutions. So they tend to be the things I look out for when I'm looking at training courses.
Looking at the sector more broadly, what are your thoughts about how the student services profession may evolve over the short to medium term?
I've found in the last few years that it's been so fast changing that it's quite hard to say. I think we've seen a real shift in perception over a number of years now, probably the last decade, from student services being a value added element of university life to being actually really integral to student experience, and particularly when we think about mental health and well-being, but all areas actually of student services and cost of living, all those sorts of things that student services support with. And then there's interesting discussions going on around duty of care at the moment, and an increase in demand in services, in part because of NHS waiting lists being as they are currently. So I think the importance of student services is growing. I think we may see further focus on how certain protected characteristics impact progression. So we might be looking at different, more tailored packages of support for students in the future. And then I think there's a financial backdrop that we're working in that we can't really ignore. So increasing demand and having to demonstrate impact with less resource potentially over time. And within student services, I think demonstrating impact can be quite challenging, particularly if you're trying to link it to progression and retention, because sometimes the linking can feel a little bit tenuous. I've made it sound a bit bleak, but it's not my intention. I think there's loads of really good, interesting developments on the horizon, and I find that staff who work in student services are always incredibly resourceful. They're expert in what they do, and so they'll grapple with those challenges really well, I think. But I suppose, yeah, short to medium term, I think we're probably looking at how we package our services differently, how we deliver more for less, how we focus in on key issues that are emerging.
And what are your views on technology in all of that? I mean, do you think that will have a greater impact on the work of student services, or is that human interaction still the most important thing? Or is it a combination?
I'd say a combination. I'm of the belief that the human interaction is the most important thing. And I think from feedback that we've had from our students, that's what they are asking for too. That's what is still really valued. And so in terms of the role of technology, yeah, there's a huge role, and that is in trying to remove the clunky systems and the barriers and the time spent on administrative tasks so that we can really focus on the human elements, so that we can free up as much time for our staff that are supporting students as we can to focus on that one-to-one holistic support for our students.
Finishing up our conversation today, Anna, how would you pitch the opportunities and benefits of working in student services to people who may not have considered it as a career option, or maybe to colleagues who are in their first or second roles and thinking about their medium-term career path?
I suppose I started by saying that my career path wasn't intentional. This is quite a difficult question. But I would say if you like working with students, if you like problem solving, and generally quite a fast-paced environment with lots of variety, then it's definitely the place to be. I think that in student services, we support students through real life problems quite often in the moment. And whilst that's challenging, it's really, really rewarding, particularly when it goes well. It's really rewarding. And I think there's always opportunities to learn more and to get involved in the type of work that student services does. So for anyone who's on their second roles or medium-term career path, I'd say look for opportunities that pique your interest and that are aligned to your values. Make suggestions for how to change things, how to make improvements. Get a mentor, and just look out for CPD opportunities. I think all of those things are always going to end in a positive if you take that approach.
Anna, it's been really interesting talking to you today. Thank you for sharing your story and insights and for being my guest.
Thank you very much.
Job Shadowing HE was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more information about her consultancy work at susanamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.